The heat hit different in Billings, Montana in late July. It was not the dry, clean heat of a summer afternoon. It was the kind of heat that pressed down on your shoulders like a man who wanted something from you. The kind that made the asphalt shimmer and the air taste like iron and dust and the bone-deep loneliness of a town that had been slowly forgetting itself for 30 years. The Dusty Fork Diner sat at the edge of Route 3 about 6 miles outside the city proper. It had never been a beautiful building and had stopped pretending otherwise sometime in the previous decade. The sign had lost 2 of its letters during the previous winter, and nobody had bothered to replace them. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, patched in places with tar that bubbled softly in the July heat. A rusted tin awning hung over the front entrance, trembling faintly whenever a truck rolled past on the highway. Inside, the ceiling fan turned slowly without conviction. The coffee was always strong and always slightly burnt. The pie was good. The pie had always been good. Emma Briggs had worked the lunch shift at the Dusty Fork for 4 years. She was 28 years old, and if you looked at her in the right light, in the soft gold of early morning, before the diner filled up and before the weight of the day had fully settled onto her face, she was genuinely beautiful. Dark copper hair that she kept pulled back in a practical braid, green eyes that missed absolutely nothing. A bone structure that her mother had always said was wasted on a girl who never went anywhere. She was slender in the way that came not from vanity, but from skipping meals so her daughter could eat first. Her hands were quick and sure, the hands of someone who had learned to pay close attention to everything because she could not afford the luxury of asking for things to be repeated. Emma Briggs had been deaf since birth, not partially, not hard of hearing in the way that older men sometimes were cupping their ears and leaning forward over their coffee. Completely, profoundly, absolutely deaf. The world she inhabited was a silent one, and she had built her life inside that silence with a particular kind of competence that most people never noticed and almost nobody understood. She read lips with a precision that bordered on something else entirely. She could hold a full conversation across a crowded diner floor without anyone nearby realizing that not a single word had reached her ears. She took orders on a small notepad, moved through the narrow space between tables with an almost choreographed efficiency, and kept the whole operation of the lunch shift running so smoothly that the owner, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who smelled perpetually of cigarettes and low-grade anxiety, had never once seriously considered replacing her. What Gerald did not know, what most people in Billings did not know, was that Emma Briggs went home every night to a house that was not safe. Her daughter Cora was 5 years old, small for her age, with the same shade of red in her hair as her mother, and the same green eyes and a serious, watchful expression that no 5-year-old should carry. Cora had been born with the same condition as her mother. She had never heard music, had never heard her own name spoken aloud, had never heard the sound of rain on a roof or wind in the trees or any of the 10,000 small sounds that the hearing world took entirely for granted. What Cora had instead was a language of hands and eyes and expression, a language she shared completely and exclusively with her mother, a private channel of communication that ran between them like a wire of pure light, invisible to everyone else in every room they had ever occupied together. Cora also had a stepfather. His name was Deputy Ray Holden, and he was 37 years old, and he had a broad, handsome face and a firm handshake, and a reputation in the department as a man who got things done. He had been with the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office for 11 years. He coached youth football in the fall. He attended the same Lutheran church as half the county commissioners. He was exactly the kind of man that small towns hold up as evidence of their own goodness, the kind of man whose surface was so convincing that the people who had known him longest were also the people least capable of seeing what was underneath it. Emma had seen it. She had seen it for a long time. She had married Ray 3 years ago, 6 months after they met at a church social where he had been patient and attentive and had taken the trouble to learn 12 words of sign language specifically to say hello to her. That gesture had undone her completely. She had been alone for so long. She had been managing so long. She had been so tired of managing. The 12 words felt like being seen, and she had mistaken being seen for being safe. The first time he hit her, Cora had been 2 years old and asleep in the next room. It had been a closed fist, not an open hand, and it had connected with the left side of Emma's jaw and knocked her sideways into the kitchen counter, and she had sat on the linoleum floor afterward with her hand pressed against her face, and thought with a strange and detached clarity that she had not heard it coming and could not hear herself cry. And both of those things felt important in ways she could not yet name. After that, the silence that had always been her world took on a different quality. It became something he used. He had learned with a cruelty that was more deliberate than passionate that she could not hear him approach from behind. He had learned that she could not call for help in a way that traveled through walls. He had learned that her disability, which she had spent 28 years making invisible through effort and skill and sheer force of will, was also a door that locked from the outside. What he had not learned, because he was not as intelligent as he believed himself to be, was that a woman who cannot hear develops every other sense to a degree that approaches something beyond ordinary perception. Emma noticed everything. She noticed the way the kitchen light changed when someone came through the back hallway. She noticed the vibration of heavy footsteps through the soles of her feet before the person reached the room. She noticed the way Ray's face shifted in the moments before things turned bad, a tightening around the eyes, a rearrangement of his mouth that she had cataloged and memorized the way a soldier memorizes the terrain around a known danger. She also noticed things he said when he believed she was not watching his lips. This was the fact that had changed everything. 10 weeks before the Iron Wolves rode into the Dusty Fork parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in July, Emma had been standing at the kitchen sink with her back to Ray washing the dinner dishes. She had been watching his reflection in the dark window above the sink. He was on the phone. She could see his face in the glass, distorted and darkened, but clear enough. His lips moved. She read them. She read them very carefully, and what she read was not a conversation about football or department business or any of the ordinary things that Ray Holden discussed on the phone in the evenings. What she read was a series of names and numbers and the name of a place, a particular stretch of Highway 212 east of town, and the words Thursday drop and keep the badge out of it, and the name of the Sheriff Dale Briggs spoken in the familiar way of men who have a long and comfortable arrangement. Emma had stood very still at the sink with her hands in the warm water and the steam rising around her wrists, and she had understood in a single vertiginous moment that the danger she was in was not just the danger she had been managing for 3 years. It was larger than that. It was institutional. It was protected from the inside out, woven into the fabric of the county itself. And the one place she might have turned, the one official door she might have knocked on, belonged to a man whose name had just come out of her husband's mouth in the tone of a co-conspirator. She had not reacted. She had finished the dishes. She had dried her hands on the dish towel with the small yellow flowers that Cora had picked out at a garage sale the previous spring. She had turned around with a neutral expression and asked Ray with her hands if he wanted more coffee, and he had nodded without looking up from his phone, and she had poured his coffee and carried Cora to bed and read her a story in sign language in the dark of the child's small bedroom. And then she had lain awake beside a man she now understood in a completely new and final way, staring at the ceiling and making a plan. The plan was not complicated. Emma was not a complicated woman. She was a practical one. She knew she could not go to the county sheriff. What she had read from Ray's lips told her that with absolute clarity. She had considered the FBI had turned the idea over carefully in her mind, but she had no contact, no name, no way to walk into a federal office without Ray knowing within hours, because this was a small county and Ray had eyes everywhere, and she had no idea how far up the arrangement went. She had a daughter to think about. She had to be certain before she moved, because if she moved and failed, she would not get a second chance. There was also a reason she could not go to Dale Briggs that went beyond his corruption, a reason that sat like a stone in the bottom of everything she had tried to calculate her way around for 3 years. Dale Briggs was not just the sheriff. He was her mother's first cousin, which made him, in the loose arithmetic of Montana family geography, something like an uncle by practice, if not by blood. He had attended her wedding. He had sat at her kitchen table. He had looked her in the eye every time Ray had manufactured a reason to have him present, and he had never once looked back at her with anything other than the comfortable authority of a man who had decided which version of events he preferred. She had tried once early on. She had written a note and passed it across the table to him while Ray was in the other room. The note had said simply, "He hurts me. Please." Dale Briggs had folded the note and put it in his shirt pocket and looked at her with those pale blue eyes, and he had said slowly enough for her to read, "Ray is a good man, Emma. You need to be more careful about the stories you tell yourself." She had never tried again. What she had was 10 weeks of careful watching, and at the end of those 10 weeks, she had in her possession a plain white envelope addressed in her small, precise handwriting to the office of Warren Locke, a civil attorney in downtown Billings, whose name she had found in the phone book because she could confirm he had no documented connection to Ray or to the sheriff's department. Inside the envelope were 4 sheets of paper covered in Emma's handwriting: dates, times, locations, license plate numbers, fragments of conversation she had read from Ray's lips across 10 weeks of watching through window glass and kitchen reflections, and the long practiced attention of a woman who had learned to read the world from a distance. The name of the highway, the name of the sheriff, the words Thursday drop written 4 times across 4 separate dates, and at the bottom of the final page, a sentence she had added last: the sheriff is Dale Briggs. He is my family. That is why I have nowhere else to go. She had mailed it certified mail on a Thursday morning during her shift from the post office 2 blocks from the diner. She had written a single instruction on a separate sheet inside: if I do not call your office by Friday at noon to confirm I am safe, please contact the FBI field office in Billings and ask for someone outside the local jurisdiction. Please do not contact any local law enforcement. Please. That Thursday had been 10 days ago. The following Saturday, Ray had come home from a shift to find that Emma had been speaking to the woman next door over the fence. He did not know what they had discussed. He had assumed the worst. The subsequent hour was the worst he had ever been, and when it was over, Emma had a cracked rib, 2 fingers that were not broken but close, and a cut above her left eyebrow that she had closed herself with butterfly bandages from the first aid kit in the bathroom. Cora had been at the neighbor's house. Cora had not seen it. This was the only thing in the entire architecture of that hour that Emma could call fortunate. On Tuesday morning, 4 days after that Saturday, Emma woke before dawn and lay in the gray half-light and understood with a cold and absolute clarity that she had reached the end of something. Her body told her so. There was a threshold of damage beyond which the body stops pretending the situation is manageable, stops sending signals that suggest endurance is still the right strategy, and simply communicates the arithmetic of what is and is not survivable. Emma's body had crossed that threshold. She could feel it the way she felt the vibration of heavy footsteps through the floor. It was not a feeling she could argue with. She got up. She dressed Cora in the pink sundress with the small white daisies along the hem, the one Cora loved. She made Cora's breakfast and watched her daughter eat with the focused attention of a child who had learned that mealtimes were a time to be quiet and still. Then she braided Cora's hair, and while she braided it, she spelled out words against her daughter's palm in the private alphabet they used when they could not see each other's faces. She spelled, "You are going to be brave today." Cora's small fingers tightened around her mother's hand. Emma had known about the Iron Wolves for approximately 3 weeks. She had known because a regular at the diner, an older man named Pete, who drove long haul and came in every Tuesday for the Blue Plate special and strong coffee, had mentioned them once while she read his lips during their usual exchange. He had been talking to Gerald about a convoy of bikes he had passed on 90 coming down from Missoula, and the words Iron Wolves had been visible on his lips, and then the words those boys run that stretch every July regular as the weather. Emma had filed that information in the precise and organized catalog of things she noticed and did not yet know the use of. She understood its use now. What she did not have was certainty. She did not know if the men on those bikes were the kind of men who helped women like her. She had heard what people said about motorcycle clubs. She understood the reputation, but she also understood in the way that people understand things when every conventional option has been exhausted. That reputation was a story other people told, and that she was out of conventional options, and that the only currency she had left was the truth, and the only bet she could make was on the chance that somewhere inside a group of men, the county feared there was a code that still applied to a woman and a child who had no one else. She wrote the note on the back of a paper placemat from the diner during her break on Monday. She wrote it in the plain, direct way she wrote everything, because she did not have the energy for anything else, and because the truth in its unadorned form was more than sufficient. She addressed it to the man with the wolf on his back. She had seen the Iron Wolves patch described once years ago in a newspaper article, and she had remembered it with the fidelity she brought to everything she had ever read. She folded the note around a photograph. The photograph was of Cora taken at Christmas sitting in front of a small tree in the living room, smiling the rare, unguarded smile that only came out when Ray was not home. She tucked the envelope inside Cora's small backpack between the stuffed bear and the change of clothes Emma always packed out of habit. On Tuesday morning, before she left for the diner, she sat across from Cora at the kitchen table and she looked at her daughter with the full, unshielded directness that she almost never allowed herself, because it frightened her how much she felt when she looked at her daughter without the practical armor of getting through the day. She signed, "If the men on the big loud bikes come to the diner today, I need you to do something important." Cora watched her mother's hands with complete attention. She signed, "Find the biggest one, the one with the wolf on his back, and give him the envelope from your bag." Cora signed back, "What if he's scary?" Emma looked at her daughter for a moment. Then she signed, "The scary ones are the ones worth asking." She had not told Cora everything. She had told her enough. 5-year-olds were more capable of carrying necessary truth than adults ever wanted to believe. And Cora, who had grown up in silence and watchfulness, was more capable than most. The Iron Wolves arrived at the Dusty Fork Diner at 2:17 in the afternoon. Emma felt them before she saw them. The vibration came through the soles of her shoes and up through her legs, a low rolling percussion that she identified immediately as engines. Multiple engines, not the familiar rumble of the semi-trucks that used the lot as a turning point, but something denser and more rhythmic. She looked up from the counter where she was refilling the ketchup bottles, and through the smeared plate glass window, she saw them coming down Route 3 in a long, loose column. 34 motorcycles. They came off the highway and into the lot with a kind of territorial ease, spreading out across the available space in an arrangement that was too orderly to be accidental and too relaxed to be planned. Chrome caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in hard, flat shards, leather and denim everywhere. Cuts with a patch she recognized from the description. She had memorized: a gray wolf head, down teeth showing against a black field. The Iron Wolves MC Montana Charter. The man at the front was the first one off his bike. He was large in the way that certain men are large, not just in physical dimension, but in the space they occupied, the air of command that preceded them into a room like a separate weather system. Rex Carver was 52 years old and built with the density of a man who had worked hard with his body for 3 decades and had not stopped. His hair was mostly gray, cut close at the sides and longer on top in a way slightly incongruous with the rest of him. His face was weathered in the manner of someone who had spent a significant portion of their life outdoors, in wind and sun, and the particular abrasion of highway miles. There were scars at his jaw, and one crossing through his left eyebrow that had gone white with age. His hands, when he pulled off his riding gloves, were large and rough and unhurried. On the back of his cut, centered between his shoulder blades, was the wolf. Beside him, dismounting with the ease of a man who had done this 10,000 times, was someone Emma would come to know as Hank Mercer. He was 68 years old, with a white beard trimmed close to his jaw, and a face that had been rearranged by life into something that looked like the topographical map of a hard country. He moved with an economy that suggested he had long since stopped wasting energy on anything that was not necessary, and he stationed himself at Rex's left shoulder with the natural ease of a man who had occupied that position for many years. Gerald went the gray color of a man calculating whether his insurance was current. 2 of the 3 other customers in the diner found urgent reasons to settle their bills. The remaining customer, an elderly farmer in a seed company cap, who had been working through a slice of pie at the counter, did not look up. Emma had always respected that about him. Rex Carver took the long booth along the left wall. His men arranged themselves through the diner with the unconscious efficiency of people accustomed to occupying spaces together. Emma worked the floor with her notepad, catching eyes pointing to the menu, writing quickly, nodding. Most of the men ordered without event. A few watched her with the frank, assessing curiosity of people encountering something unexpected. She was accustomed to that look. She had been fielding it her whole life. Rex Carver ordered the blue plate special and black coffee without looking at the menu. For 40 minutes, the Dusty Fork was simply full. Noise and motion and the smell of coffee and fried food and engine oil and the road-worn scent of men who had been riding in July heat. Gerald stayed behind his counter. Emma moved between tables with Cora's corner always in her peripheral vision. Cora sat in the back booth with her stuffed bear and her serious expression and watched everything. At 3:02, the men began to finish. Bills were settled. The group moved toward the door in gradual waves. Emma was at the counter rolling silverware when Rex Carver pushed through the front door into the parking lot. She watched through the window. She watched him walk toward his bike. She watched him reach into his vest. She watched him stop. Not slow down. Stop. The full sudden stop of a man whose forward motion has been arrested by something his body has responded to before his mind is caught up. She looked at Cora's booth. It was empty. Emma set down the silverware. She untied her apron. She walked through the diner and out the front door into the hard July sun. The parking lot had gone quiet. 34 men had come to a gradual collective stillness. The stillness was connected rippling outward from the point where Rex Carver stood motionless beside his motorcycle. Emma walked through the lanes between the parked bikes, and the men she passed stepped back without being asked, opening a path with a wordless, instinctive courtesy. She walked until she could see past Rex Carver's shoulder to the seat of his motorcycle. Cora was sitting on it. She was sitting very straight, the way she sat when she was trying to be serious, and grown up her small feet nowhere near the foot pegs, her hands folded in her lap with great deliberateness. Her green eyes were fixed on Rex Carver's face with the direct, unblinking focus that she had inherited entirely from her mother. In her hands held out toward him with the formal intentionality of a child performing a task she has been given and is determined to complete correctly, was the white envelope. Rex Carver was looking at the child on his motorcycle with an expression Emma could not fully read from behind, but she could read the set of his shoulders, the quality of the stillness in his very large body, and she understood that the stillness was not anger. She had learned to distinguish the varieties of male stillness with a precision born of necessity. This was not the tight, coiled stillness that preceded danger. This was the stillness of a man who has been stopped by something unexpected and is holding himself very carefully around it. Emma came around to where Cora could see her. Cora's eyes found her immediately. Her small hand, still holding the envelope toward Rex, moved once a quick, private sign that meant, "I did it, Mama." Emma looked at Rex Carver. He was looking at her now. The directness of his gaze was considerable. It was the gaze of a man accustomed to reading situations quickly and accurately, a man who did not look away from things. His gray eyes moved across her face with a thoroughness that was not unkind, but was not gentle either. It was the look of a man taking inventory. Emma did not look away. She pointed to the envelope in Cora's hands. She pointed to Rex Carver. She touched her own sternum with 2 fingers and then opened her hand palm up toward him. In the private language of her body, this meant, "This is mine and it is for you, and I am asking." Rex looked at the gesture. He looked at Emma. He looked at Cora. He took the envelope. He turned it in his hands. He looked at the front where Emma had written in her small, careful script, "For the man with the wolf. Please read this alone first." The please was underlined twice. He looked back at Emma. Something in his face asked a question. Emma tapped her ear and shook her head once. Rex Carver held the envelope for a moment. Then he said something to Hank, and Hank moved through the group with the quiet efficiency of a man redistributing weight, and within 90 seconds, 33 men had moved to a loose perimeter around the parking lot, occupying the space at a respectful distance from where Rex Carver stood alone beside his motorcycle with the envelope in his hands. Rex opened the envelope. Emma watched him read. She watched his face because she had spent her entire adult life watching faces, and because at this particular moment, it was the only text available to her. She watched the neutrality of his expression hold for the first 3 sentences and then begin slowly to change. Not dramatically, not with the performative shift of someone who wanted to be seen reacting. With the small, contained alterations of a man whose interior landscape is adjusting to new information and is not going to make a show of the adjustment. She watched his jaw tighten. She watched his eyes slow down on a particular section of the page, reading more carefully, reading again. She watched him turn to the second sheet where she had written the dates and the names and the words in Thursday drop and the name of the highway. She watched him stop moving entirely for a moment that lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds is not very long. 4 seconds is long enough. He read to the end. He folded the papers back into the envelope with the photograph of Cora at Christmas. He held the envelope at his side and looked out at the highway, and the muscles at the side of his jaw worked once, twice, and settled. He turned to Emma. She had prepared for skepticism. She had prepared for the polite dismissal of a man who had decided her problem was not his problem. She had prepared for him to be sorry, but moving on, and she had prepared for what she would do after that, which was to call Warren Locke's office on Friday morning herself and tell him to open the envelope. And she had prepared for this with the depleted determination of a woman who has burned through everything else and is running on the last of it. She had not prepared for what Rex Carver actually did. He held up one hand palm toward her in the universal gesture for wait, and then slowly and deliberately watching her face for confirmation that she was understanding him, he raised his other hand and formed a shape with his fingers that was imperfect and unpracticed. Clearly the gesture of someone retrieving something learned once from a considerable distance, but unmistakably the sign for okay. Emma stared at him. Rex Carver held her gaze. His face did not soften into the sentimental expression that people sometimes produced when they made gestures toward her disability, the expression that told her the gesture was for them and not for her. His face was steady and direct and matter of fact. The sign meant what it said. Nothing more and nothing less. Cora, still sitting on the motorcycle, looked up at her mother. Emma became aware that she had not breathed properly in approximately 30 seconds. She breathed. She signed to Cora, "Come down now, sweetheart." Cora climbed carefully down from the motorcycle with the focused seriousness she applied to all physical tasks. She came to stand beside Emma, and she slipped her small hand into Emma's hand, and Emma closed her fingers around her daughter's and held on. Rex said something to Hank. Hank spoke to the group, and the group did not move to their bikes. Instead, in a coordinated movement that was both casual and deliberate, they began to close the perimeter. Not aggressively, without any posturing or display, simply positioning themselves in the way that a group of people who intend to stay somewhere make themselves at home in the geography of a place. Emma understood what she was looking at. 34 motorcycles positioned between her and the highway. The largest man in the group standing between her and the road with his arms at his sides and his gray eyes on the distance. It was 3:16 in the afternoon. Emma knew because she always knew because she had learned to keep this particular fact updated in her mind at all times that Ray Holden got off shift at 5. It was a 40-minute drive from the department to the diner. This gave her at the outside approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes. She looked at Rex Carver. She raised her hand and formed a number with her fingers. 1 hour. He looked at the number. He nodded once, the single definitive nod of a man who has understood and is not going to qualify the understanding with additional words. Emma looked out at the highway. The heat was still pressing down. The Dusty Forks broken sign cast a narrow shadow across the cracked lot, and in that shadow a little girl with copper hair stood holding her mother's hand, looking up at 34 men in leather cuts with wolf patches on their backs, and did not look afraid. Emma looked down at Cora. Cora signed, "Are they going to help us?" Emma looked at the men. She looked at Rex Carver, who was looking back at her with the steady, unperformative steadiness of a man who had said okay and intended it. She had been wrong before about what protection looked like, and it had cost her years in the long internal erosion of trusting her own judgment. She held that possibility in one hand and the evidence in front of her eyes in the other, and she made the assessment that her life had trained her to make. She signed back, "I think yes." The afternoon held still around them. The engines cooled. The highway ran empty in both directions. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk turned in a thermal above the brown hills east of Billings, tilting against the blue sky with the absolute authority of something that understood the geometry of the moment. Inside the diner, the elderly farmer in the seed company cap finally set down his fork. He looked out the window at the parking lot full of motorcycles and the small woman with the copper hair standing in the center of it. He reached for his coffee, which had been sitting untouched and growing cold for the last 20 minutes. He drank it slowly. He did not look away from the window. Rex Carver read the letter a second time. He did it standing beside his motorcycle in the July heat, not moving, not speaking. The paper held steady in his large hands, while the rest of the lot went about the quiet business of waiting. The second reading was slower than the first. He had learned in 52 years of living in ways that required accurate information that the first reading of anything important told you what it said, and the second reading told you what it meant. What it meant was this. A woman who could not hear had spent 10 weeks watching a man who believed her silence made her manageable. She had read his lips through a dark window and written down what she saw. She had mailed the evidence to a lawyer she had found in a phone book because he was the only one she could verify had no connection to the machinery she was describing. She had done all of this alone with a 5-year-old in the house and a cracked rib, in the kind of courage that does not feel like courage from the inside because it is built entirely from having no other option. Rex folded the letter and put it in the interior pocket of his cut against his chest. He turned to Hank Mercer, who was standing at his left shoulder, with the patient economy of a man who had learned long ago that information comes to those who do not rush it. Hank was 68 years old, and he had been riding with Rex for 19 years. Before that, he had done 2 years in a Montana State Correctional Facility for a weapons charge that had been the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, which the FBI had eventually acknowledged quietly and without ceremony when the actual principals of that case were brought in 4 years after Hank's release. The agent who had delivered that acknowledgement had been a compact man named Paul Donovan, working out of the Billings field office. He had handed Hank a business card across a table in a room that smelled of industrial cleaning solution and said, "If you ever have information about organized criminal activity in this state, this number is good." Hank had looked at the card for a moment and then put it in his wallet and said nothing. That had been 14 years ago. Rex handed the letter to Hank without speaking. Hank read it. He read it once with the unhurried attention he brought to everything, and when he was finished, he folded it and handed it back and looked at the highway. "He said the sheriff is in it," Rex said. "That is what she wrote." Hank was quiet for a moment with the quality of a man going through something internal. Then he reached into his cut and he took out his wallet, the one that had seen better decades and was held together along one edge with electrical tape, and he went through it with the patience of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for and exactly where it has been sitting for 14 years. He produced a card. It was a business card, its corners soft with age, the print faded at the edges, but the phone number still legible. Rex looked at it. He looked at Hank. Hank said 2010, weapons charge, 2 years served. The FBI came 4 years after my release and told me they had the actual principals and that my record would be cleared. The agent who told me handed me this card. He said if I ever had information about organized criminal activity in this state, the number was good. I told him I would keep that in mind. Rex said, "You never used it." Hank said, "Nothing before today was worth 14 years of waiting." Rex looked at the card. He looked at the highway. He looked at Emma, who was standing 15 feet away, with Cora's hand in hers, watching their faces with the focused attention of a woman reading 2 conversations simultaneously. He said, "Make the call." Hank walked to the far edge of the parking lot, away from the group and away from the road, and he dialed. Rex walked to Emma. He stopped in front of her and held up his phone. He typed, "We are making a call to someone who can help. Federal, not local." "Do you understand?" Emma read the screen. Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, something that preceded relief, the first loosening of a thing that had been held very tight for a very long time. She nodded. He typed, "How many deputies does he have access to?" Emma took the phone from him and typed back without hesitation, "County has 11 deputies total. I have seen 6 at the house. The sheriff comes by twice a month." Rex read this. He showed it to Cole Dixon, a heavy-set man in his mid-40s who ran the logistics for the charter and had a talent for spatial reasoning. Cole looked at the numbers, looked at the parking lot, looked at the highway in both directions, and began moving through the group with the quiet efficiency of a man redistributing weight. Within 4 minutes, the 34 motorcycles had been repositioned. Not barricaded, not theatrical, simply arranged so that the lot had 2 entry points instead of 5, both flanked by bikes, and the men sitting on them with the relaxed patience of people who had nowhere else to be. Rex went back to Emma. He typed, "Is there anywhere safer for your daughter inside?" Emma looked at Gerald through the plate glass window. He had both hands flat on the counter and the expression of a man who had committed fully to the strategy of pretending he was somewhere else. She typed back, "Gerald will not cause trouble. He is scared of everything." Rex typed the back booth away from windows. Emma signed it to Cora, a longer sequence, and Cora listened with complete attention and then nodded with the gravity of a 5-year-old who has been given a task she understands the importance of. Emma leaned down and held her daughter's face in both hands for a moment, something passing between them, in the way things pass between people who share a private language, and then Cora walked back into the diner and took the back booth and sat down and folded her hands on the table and waited. Rex watched the child walk into the diner. He was aware of something happening in his chest that he did not examine directly. He had learned to not examine certain things directly. He knew what it was. He had known what it was from the moment he had pulled back the envelope and looked down at a small girl sitting on his motorcycle with her hands folded, waiting to complete a task her mother had given her. He knew what it was, and he put it where he put things that needed to stay out of the way while he worked. He had a daughter. He had not seen her in 6 years. This was not something he discussed. Hank came back from the edge of the parking lot with the unhurried stride of a man who has made his decision and is carrying the consequences of it forward. He said, he answered, "Name is Paul Donovan Billings, field office." He remembered the case. He remembered me. Rex said, "How fast?" Hank said, 45 minutes if they push it. He is bringing a tactical unit. Rex looked at his watch. He did the arithmetic. It was not encouraging arithmetic. Ray Holden would come off shift and be in this lot in roughly 60 minutes if he drove straight here, which Emma had said he always did on Tuesdays. That left 45 minutes of gap, 45 minutes of a dirty deputy with a service weapon and 11 years of authority in this county, standing in a parking lot with a woman he considered his property and federal backup still on the highway. He looked at his men. He said, "We hold the lot. Nobody engages first. But if that badge reaches for anything, you do not wait for a signal." Cole Dixon said, "Understood." Hank said, "All 34 of us." Rex said, "All 34. He turned to Emma. He typed on his phone and held it out. "Federal agents are coming. 45 minutes. We hold until they arrive. Are you with us?" Emma read the screen. She stood very still for a moment. The July heat pressed down on the parking lot, and the awning trembled in a breath of hot air from the highway, and a truck went past on Route 3 without slowing down. She took the phone and typed, "He gets off shift in less than an hour. He always comes here first on Tuesdays." She handed it back. Then she reached into her apron pocket and produced a small notebook, spiral bound at the top, and she tore out a page and wrote on it and handed it to Rex. The note read, "There is a USB drive in my locker inside, taped to the back. It has photographs of his truck at the Highway 212 location on 4 separate dates. I took them from the diner parking lot when he stopped here during a Thursday shift change. He does not know I have them. This is separate from what I sent the lawyer. I was keeping it in case I needed proof that was harder to dismiss." Rex read the note. He read it again. He looked at Emma Briggs, this 28-year-old deaf waitress, with the copper hair and the cracked rib and the butterfly bandages above her left eye, standing in a parking lot in Billings, Montana, and he understood that the word careful did not begin to cover what she was. He said, knowing she would read his lips, "You did all of this by yourself." It was not a question. She did not respond for a moment. Then she touched the butterfly bandages with 2 fingers lightly, a gesture that was not self-pity and not a bid for sympathy, just an acknowledgement of the arithmetic of her situation. Then she went inside and came back with the USB drive, a small black rectangle with a piece of old tape still attached to one side, and she gave it to Rex. Rex gave it to Hank. Hank put it in the interior pocket of his cut beside the business card. 38 minutes later, a green Silverado pickup turned off Route 3 and came slowly down the access road toward the Dusty Fork parking lot. It was not Ray Holden's truck. It was older, a late 90s model with a cracked windshield and a County Parks and Recreation decal on the rear window. It pulled to a stop at the edge of the lot, and a man got out in civilian clothes, a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and dark slacks and shoes that were wrong for the July heat. He stood beside his truck and looked at the lot full of motorcycles, and then he looked for the person in charge. His eyes found Rex Carver. He walked forward. He stopped 10 feet out and he said, "My name is Dale Briggs. I am the sheriff of this county. I heard there was a situation involving one of my deputies, and I came to handle it personally." Rex Carver said nothing. Dale Briggs was 53 years old, 1 year older than Rex, and he had the comfortable, authoritative manner of a man who had been making rooms arrange themselves around him for a long time. His eyes were pale blue and quick, and they moved through the lot with the practiced assessment of someone calculating odds. He said, "I understand a woman came to you with some concerns. I want you to know that those concerns are being taken seriously. But this is a county matter, and I need to speak with her directly." Rex said nothing. The lot was very quiet. 33 men had stopped whatever small movements they had been making. The stillness was the stillness of a shared decision, wordless and complete. Dale Briggs looked around and his jaw moved once. He said, I know you men have certain issues with law enforcement, and I respect that. But whatever that woman told you, she has a history of this kind of behavior. She is not well. My deputy has done everything he could for her, and she has a pattern of making accusations. Rex looked at him steadily. Dale Briggs said, I am not saying this to dismiss her. I am saying it because you deserve to know what you are actually dealing with before you make a decision that puts 34 men in federal jeopardy. Rex said, she told me about the Thursday drops on Highway 212. Dale Briggs went still. Rex said, she told me about the 6 names. She told me about the arrangement. He watched Briggs process this. He watched the comfortable authority drain out of the man's face with the slow subsidence of something losing structural integrity from the inside. Then Rex looked past Briggs at Emma, who was standing near the diner entrance watching everything. He looked at Briggs again. He said, she also told me about you. Not just the arrangement. The other thing, Briggs said, I don't know what you mean. Rex held his gaze. He said, she passed you a note years ago. You put it in your pocket and you told her to be more careful about the stories she told herself. Something moved through the lot. Not a sound, a quality of atmosphere. The specific heaviness of a room when a truth has been spoken that cannot be unsaid. Briggs looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked back up, and the pale blue eyes had shifted from calculation to something raw. He said, that is a family matter. Rex said, that is what she had, nobody left. Briggs opened his mouth. He closed it. He reached for the radio on his hip. Cole Dixon was off his motorcycle before the hand completed its arc. He stepped into the space between Briggs and his truck in a single fluid motion and stood there with his arms at his sides in the immovability of something geological. Briggs looked at Cole. He looked at Rex. Rex said, you are going to wait here with us. Briggs said, you are making a very serious mistake. Rex said, I have made a lot of mistakes. I know what they feel like. This is not one of them. For a moment, the lot held that tension, the way a bridge holds weight, everything low, bearing nothing moving. Then Briggs lowered the radio to his side. He did not put it back on his hip. He held it and stood very still and looked at Rex with the eyes of a man going through his remaining options and finding them considerably reduced. Emma was standing near the diner entrance. She had read enough of the exchange to understand the shape of it. She watched Dale Briggs stand in the center of the lot, held in place, not by force, but by the accumulated weight of 34 men who had simply decided, and she felt something she recognized after a moment as the specific sensation of a lock disengaging. Not a dramatic sensation, a quiet one. The feeling of a door that has been sealed for a very long time, opening inward under no pressure at all, simply because the mechanism that held it has finally been removed. She also understood that there were now 22 minutes until Ray Holden got off shift. She walked to Rex. She tapped his arm. When he turned, she held up her fingers. 2. He looked at his watch. He looked at Hank. Hank said, he is 14 minutes from here if he comes straight. Rex said, he will come straight. She said he always does on Tuesdays. Hank said, then we have 8 minutes before we have overlap. Rex looked at the lot. He looked at Cole standing beside Briggs. He looked at the highway to the east, long and straight and empty in the afternoon heat. He said, nobody moves until he is in the lot. We do not go to him. We let him come in. The men nearest him passed this through the group in low voices. The lot resettled into its patient arrangement, the small sounds of a deliberate stillness maintained over time. Dale Briggs sat down on the hood of his own truck. He did it without being told to, with the diminished air of a man who has accepted a new reality and is now simply waiting to understand how far down it goes. He held his radio in his lap and looked at the cracked asphalt. Emma went inside and checked on Cora. Cora was in the back booth with a paper placemat and a crayon she had found somewhere, working on a drawing with the total absorption of a child who has been told to stay put and has found a way to be completely present in the staying. Emma slid into the booth across from her, and Cora held up the drawing without looking up from it, the way children do when they know a parent is there and want to share without breaking concentration. It was a drawing of motorcycles. They were the motorcycles of a 5-year-old's, rendering circles and lines, and the suggestion of handlebars spread across the page in a loose arrangement that Emma recognized as the parking lot. In the center, two small figures stood together, one tall and one very small, with what appeared to be the sun directly overhead. Emma sat with her daughter in the back booth and looked at the drawing and breathed. She thought about the envelope in Warren Locke's office. She thought about the USB drive in Hank Mercer's pocket. She thought about 45 minutes and 22 minutes in the specific arithmetic of a situation where the numbers did not add up in your favor and you had already committed to the bet. She thought about Ray. She thought about him in the detailed way she had been trained by 3 years of proximity to think about him cataloging the variables, reading the signs. She thought about the speed at which he moved when he had decided on something. She thought about the performance he would put on first. The reasonable deputy, the concerned husband, the patient man who had come to collect a difficult situation. She thought about how long the performance would hold. She thought there is no gap for it to move into. She signed to Cora. "Are you okay, my love?" Cora signed back, still not looking up from her drawing. "I am drawing the wolves." Emma signed. "I can see that." Cora signed. "The big one in the middle is the one with the wolf on his back." Emma looked at the figure in the center of the drawing, the tallest one positioned between the two smaller figures in the edge of the paper. She signed, "Yes, I think that is right." She stayed 4 more minutes. Then she felt it through the floor and the booth bench, the change in vibration, the specific low frequency she had cataloged over 3 years, the weight and density of a particular truck. She looked at Cora. She signed, "Stay here. Do not come outside, no matter what." Cora looked up from her drawing. Her green eyes were steady and serious and carrying more than a 5-year-old's eyes should carry. She signed, "I know, Mama." Emma stood up. She walked through the diner and pushed through the front door into the July heat. Ray Holden's truck was pulling into the lot. A black Ford F-150, 3 years old, kept clean, coming in at the measured speed of a man performing calm. It stopped at the edge of the lot. The door opened. Ray Holden stepped out in his uniform, broad through the shoulders, wearing it with the ease of a man who had never questioned whether it fit him. His face when he saw the lot went through its scan. It registered the motorcycles that mend the arrangement. It found Dale Briggs sitting on the hood of his truck with a radio in his lap. It moved past that and found Emma. He walked toward her across the cracked asphalt, and 34 men let him come, and Rex Carver stood to Emma's left at a distance of 6 feet, not close enough to be theatrical, but close enough, and Ray Holden came across the lot in his clean uniform and put on the face that Emma knew best, the patient, slightly pained face of a man who has come to collect a difficult situation and resolve it quietly. He stopped in front of Emma. He said clearly enough for her to read every word, "Emma, let's go home. Whatever you told these people, we can sort it out. I am not angry. I just need you to come with me." Emma looked at him. She had stood in front of this man in this posture more times than she could count. She had stood this way in kitchens and hallways and in the driveway at 11 at night when she had tried once to put Cora in the car, and he had come out and stood behind the car and been very patient and very clear about what would happen if she did not come back inside. She was standing the same way now, the same posture, the same stillness. But the lot was different. Ray looked past her at Rex. He said, "I don't know who you are, but this is a private family matter, and I am asking you to stay out of it." Rex said nothing. Ray said, "I am a county deputy. This woman is my wife. I am asking you to let me take her home." Rex said, "She does not want to go with you." Ray said, "She has a condition." She gets confused. "I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am telling you this is a documented medical situation, and I am here to take her home." Rex said, "Is a cracked rib part of the documented medical situation?" The lot went very quiet. Ray's face did not change. This was one of the things Emma had always noted about him, the quality of his facial control. But his eyes moved. They moved to Emma, and they did the calculations she had seen them do 100 times, the arithmetic of her options and his in the variables that could be controlled. He said, "I don't know what she told you." Rex said, "She did not tell us anything. She wrote it down. 10 weeks of it, dates and names and a highway and an arrangement with the man sitting on that truck." Ray looked at Dale Briggs on the hood of the Silverado. Something passed between them, fast and professional, the communication of two men who have been in a long arrangement and are now watching it come apart. Ray looked back at Rex. He said, "You are interfering with a law enforcement matter." Rex said, "I am standing in a parking lot." Ray's hand moved to his radio, not his weapon. His radio. Rex said quietly, "I would put that down." Ray said, "You do not tell me what to do." Rex said, "I am telling you what the situation is. Federal agents are on their way. They have your name and the sheriff's name and an open file on this county. The woman next to me mailed a certified letter to a civil attorney 10 days ago with your schedule and your contacts and the name of the highway. We have a USB drive with photographs from 4 separate dates. You have time to make a decision about how this ends. That time is running out." Ray Holden stood in the afternoon sun in his clean uniform and processed this information, and Emma watched the processing arrive at its conclusion. She had seen Ray in many configurations. She had never seen him frightened. She understood that she was seeing it now beneath the uniform and the facial control, and she understood that fear in a man like Ray was not a softening thing. It was an accelerant. His hand moved from the radio to his weapon. He did not draw it. He put his hand on it. It was a statement about where the conversation was and where it was willing to go. Rex Carver did not move back. He did not move forward. He did not change his posture or the quality of his stillness. He stood exactly where he had been standing, and he looked at Ray Holden with the eyes that had been looking at difficult things for 52 years without looking away, and he said one sentence. He said, "You are going to need to move that hand." Behind Ray, 33 men who were not speaking and not posturing were simply present in the specific, irrevocable way of people who have committed to a position. Beside Ray Dale Briggs sat on the hood of his truck and looked at the ground. Between Ray and Emma, there was only the cracked Montana asphalt and the July heat and the weight of everything that had happened in the years that led to this specific afternoon. Emma looked at Ray. She had spent 3 years in a silence he had used as a weapon. She had spent 3 years watching his lips and reading the world through a window he had locked her behind. She was done being behind it. She raised her hands and she signed to him. She knew he could not read sign language. She knew it did not matter. She signed because it was her language, the one that was entirely hers, the one he had never had access to and never would. And what she signed was simple and plain and true in the way that things are true when they have been carried a very long time. She signed, "It is over." In the distance on the long, straight run of Route 3 coming from the west, the first suggestion of moving light appeared on the highway. Not sirens yet, just the light catching the late afternoon sun multiplied. Hank Mercer saw it first. He said in a voice that was quiet and carried without effort through the still lot, "Here they come." The vehicles came off Route 3 without sirens. 6 black Chevrolet Tahoes running in tight formation, blue and red lights, going but silent. The kind of approach that said, "We are not here to announce ourselves, we are here to finish something." They turned into the dusty fork lot with a precision that suggested the drivers had done this kind of entry before spreading across the available space in a practice pattern that sealed the exits without theater. The doors opened before the vehicles had fully stopped. 12 men in tactical vests came out fast and clean weapons up and directed moving to positions with the compressed efficiency of people who had rehearsed the geometry. The vests said FBI in yellow letters. The weapons were not pointed at the Iron Wolves. They were pointed at Ray Holden and at Dale Briggs. A 13th man came out of the lead Tahoe without a tactical vest. He was in his late 50s, compact with close-cropped gray hair, and the face of someone who had been shaped by the long practice of not reacting to things he had not yet fully assessed. He wore a dark jacket despite the heat carrying it with the ease of someone who had stopped noticing the temperature a long time ago. He held up a credential wallet as he walked forward, not showily, just so that it was visible to everyone in the lot simultaneously. He said, "FBI, nobody move." His eyes went to Hank Mercer. Something in his face adjusted not to warmth, but to recognition. He walked to Hank. He said, "You kept the card." Hank said, "I keep things that matter." The agent looked at him for a moment. He put out his hand and Hank shook it. The agent said, "Paul Donovan. The file on this county has been open for 8 months. We could not get traction. The informants kept disappearing." Hank reached into his interior pocket and produced the USB drive. He held it out. Donovan took it and said, "What is on it?" Hank said, "Photographs." The woman took them herself. 4 dates, same highway location. The deputy's truck at the drop site. Donovan looked across the lot at Emma. He walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance and held up the USB and raised his eyebrows in a question. Emma nodded. Donovan said clearly and without turning his face away so that she could read him. My name is Paul Donovan. I am with the FBI field office in Billings. We are going to take care of this. Is there anything you need to tell me right now before we proceed? Emma took the small notepad from her apron pocket. She wrote on it and handed it to him. He read it. He read it again. He looked up at her. The note said, there is a certified letter at the office of Warren Locke Attorney, downtown Billings. I sent it 10 days ago. It has 10 weeks of dates, names, and locations. The USB has the photographs. Between the two, you have everything I have. Please make sure the letter does not get lost. Donovan said, it will not get lost. I am sending someone to that office within the hour. He turned to two of his agents and spoke to them. They went to one of the Tahoes and pulled out of the lot, heading toward Billings. Donovan walked toward Ray Holden. Ray had not moved. He was standing where he had been standing when the Tahoes pulled in both hands at his sides, now his face in the process of completing a transition from performance to something rawer and less managed. His uniform was immaculate. He looked like exactly what he had presented himself as for 11 years, a county deputy in good standing, a man the community trusted. He also looked like a man watching 11 years of careful construction come apart in a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon. Donovan stopped in front of him and said, Deputy Ray Holden. Ray said, I want a lawyer. Donovan said, that is your right. Before I read you informally, I want you to know that we have had a file on the Highway 212 operation for 8 months. We have your vehicle on surveillance twice at the Carson Road interchange. We have financial records connected to your name through 2 intermediary accounts. What we did not have was a primary witness with documented dates and direct evidence. We have that now. Ray looked past Donovan at Emma. Emma was watching. She read the word witness on Donovan's lips. She saw Ray look at her, and she held his gaze with the stillness she had used against him for years. The stillness that was not submission, but its opposite. The stillness of a woman who has been waiting for a long time and has stopped needing him to acknowledge what she knew. Ray said she is deaf. She cannot testify to things she overheard. Donovan said, she did not overhear anything. She read your lips through a window reflection for 10 weeks and wrote down every word with dates and times. A federal judge will find that testimony highly credible, Deputy, because it required extraordinary patience and attention and a complete absence of any motive other than truth. Something in Ray's face subsided, not with the drama of a man undone in a single moment, but with the slow settling of a structure that has been losing integrity from the inside for some time and has now reached the point where the surface can no longer hold. 2 agents came forward with handcuffs. Ray put his hands behind his back with the rote compliance of a man who had put handcuffs on enough other people to know the mechanics. The cuffs went on with a sound that was small and definitive and audible across the quiet lot. Across the lot, 2 other agents walked to Dale Briggs. Briggs was still sitting on the hood of his truck. He had the settled, depleted look of a man who had used the waiting time to arrive somewhere past resistance. He stood when the agents reached him, and he turned and put his hands behind his back without being asked. Before they walked him to the vehicle, Briggs turned his head and looked at Emma across the lot. It was not an apology. It was not a plea. It was the look of a man who has arrived at the end of something and is trying to locate somewhere in the accounting of it the moment when a different choice was available to him. He looked at Emma for 3 seconds. Emma looked back at him with the green eyes that missed nothing and did not give him what he was looking for because it was not hers to give. The agents walked him to a vehicle, and he got in. The sound that moved through the assembled Iron Wolves was not cheering and was not commentary. It was the low collective sound of men who have been holding position for a long time and have just been given permission to let it down. It was the sound of a breath released. It was brief and quiet and sufficient. Rex Carver stood with his arms folded and watched Dale Briggs get into the federal vehicle, and he was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Hank. Rex said 8 months they had a file and could not move it. Hank said, it takes a witness. It always takes a witness. Rex said, she was in that house for 3 years. Hank said, yes. Rex said nothing else. He unfolded his arms. He walked to where Emma was standing near the diner entrance and stopped in front of her. She was not crying. He thought about the letter in the USB drive and the 10 weeks of watching and the certified letter and the careful architecture of a plan built entirely alone. and he understood that this was not a woman who cried when things worked. This was a woman who had spent everything she had just to arrive at this moment and was now standing on the other side of it. He held out his phone. He typed, "It is done. Are you all right?" She took the phone and looked at the screen for a moment. She typed, "I do not know yet. I think I will know later." He read this and nodded. She typed, "Thank you. I do not have a better word than that." He typed, "You did most of it yourself." She looked at the screen. A small line appeared between her brows, the expression of someone reading something and not quite accepting it. She typed, "You stayed." He looked at the word. He thought about what it meant to this woman to whom staying had not been a reliable feature of the landscape for a very long time. He typed, "Yes." She read it. She held the phone for a moment without typing anything. Then she handed it back and turned to the diner door and went inside to get her daughter. Cora was in the back booth with the placemat covered in crayon motorcycles and the expression of a child who has stayed put as instructed and is now calculating how long that requirement remains in effect. When she saw Emma come through the diner, she looked at her mother's face with the accuracy of a child who has learned to read faces the way her mother read lips, and whatever she read, there satisfied something in her because she gathered the placemat, drawing carefully with both hands, and held it against her chest and stood up. Emma crouched down in front of her. She signed, "It is okay now." Cora signed, "Is the bad man gone?" Emma signed, "Yes." Cora signed, "Did the wolves help?" Emma looked at her daughter. She signed, "Yes." They stayed. Cora considered this with the seriousness she brought to information she intended to keep. She signed, "I knew they would." Emma put her hand gently on top of Cora's head, her palm resting on the copper hair she had braided that morning in the kitchen of a house she would not go back to, and she felt her daughter lean into the touch with the small, complete trust of a child who has been told the truth and found it reliable. Emma stood up. She took Cora's hand. They walked through the diner together, and Gerald looked at Emma with the expression of a man who has witnessed something he does not have a framework for and is in the early stages of constructing one. He opened his mouth and closed it. Emma walked past him and through the front door and into the parking lot. Cora came through the door and stopped. The lot was still full, 34 motorcycles and 34 men in leather cuts with wolf patches on their backs, and the federal vehicles finishing their work at the edges in the afternoon sun that had shifted from its worst to the long amber quality of late afternoon in Montana. And in the middle of all of it was a 5-year-old girl with copper hair and a placemat drawing who stopped in the doorway and took a thorough inventory. Rex Carver was standing 20 feet away. He saw her come through the door. He turned toward her. Cora walked across the parking lot to where he was standing. She walked the way she had walked earlier with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission, and she stopped in front of Rex and looked up at him. He looked down at her. She held out the placemat drawing. He took it from her hands. He looked at it. Motorcycles spread across the page, many of them in the loose arrangement of the lot, and in the center, one figure larger than all the others, with something on its back that was not precise, but was unmistakably intentional. The wolf on its back. Rex Carver held the placemat drawing in his large scarred hands and looked at it for a moment that lasted longer than the previous moments had lasted. Something in his face that had been held at a careful distance from the day's events moved closer to the surface. He did not look away from the drawing. Cora watched him. Then she reached into the small backpack she was still wearing, and she took out the stuffed bear. It was brown and well-worn and missing a button eye on the left side, and Cora had carried it every day for 2 years with the complete loyal devotion of a child and a companion. She held it out to Rex. He looked at it. She held it higher with the patient insistence of a 5-year-old who has decided on something and is prepared to wait. Rex Carver took the stuffed bear from the child's hands. He held it in one hand and the drawing in the other, and he looked at Cora, who was looking back at him with the clear, unornamented gaze of a child who has completed what she set out to do. He said, "I will keep it safe." Cora read his lips. She nodded with the gravity of a 5-year-old who has decided something permanently. Then she turned and walked back to her mother. Emma watched the bear go from her daughter's hands to the large scarred hands of the man with the wolf on his back. She felt something she had not felt in a long time, something she did not have a sign for because it was not a thing she had had occasion to name often. It was the feeling of being located, of being in a place on the map that had coordinates after a long time of being somewhere that did not. Agent Donovan walked over to Emma. He had a notepad and a pen, and he held them out to her as a courtesy and said, "I would like to take your statement. We can do this now or tomorrow at the office, whichever you prefer." Emma took the notepad. She wrote, "Now is fine. I have been waiting a long time to say it." Donovan read this. He said, "All right. Let us start from the beginning." They sat in the back booth of the Dusty Fork, the booth with the clear sight line to the front door and the back exit. Gerald brought coffee without being asked and retreated to his counter and did not interrupt. Cora sat beside her mother and drew more motorcycles on another placemat. Donovan sat across from them and asked his questions by writing them on the notepad, and Emma answered each one with the same small, precise handwriting she had used on the letter that had started everything. She wrote for 40 minutes. She wrote the dates and the times and the words she had read from Ray's lips through the kitchen window, and she wrote the schedule of the Thursday drops and the names and the financial terminology she had not understood but had written down phonetically, and which Donovan recognized immediately as the language of the shell company structure he had been trying to untangle for 8 months. She wrote about the 6 deputies whose cars she had seen in her driveway, and the 2 times Dale Briggs had come to the house and sat at the kitchen table and talked with his head angled away from her because he believed her silence made her irrelevant. She wrote about reading him anyway. She wrote about all of it, and when she was done, she looked at what she had produced page after page in her small, careful hand, and she felt the lightness of things that have been carried alone for a long time and have finally been set down somewhere solid. Donovan looked at the pages. He looked at Emma. He said, "This is extraordinary. What you did, the patience required to collect this documentation under these circumstances. You understand that this is the piece we were missing. 8 months and this is what was missing." Emma wrote, "I had nothing else to work with. I used what I had." Donovan read this and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The photographs and your testimony together are enough to proceed. The certified letter at your lawyer's office is a separately preserved record. You will need to testify. I want to be honest with you about that." Emma wrote, "I know. I will testify." Donovan said, "We have the Victim Services Program, housing assistance, security arrangements, relocation options if you want them. I would like you to speak to someone from that program today." Emma wrote, "Yes, but first I need to know that my daughter is safe tonight." Donovan said, "She is safe. I give you my word on that." Emma looked at him for a moment, reading his face with the complete attention she brought to every face, and she made the assessment her life had trained her to make, and she wrote, "All right." They came out of the diner at 5:15. The lot had changed. The federal vehicles were reduced to 2, the others having departed with Ray and Dale Briggs and 2 additional deputies located and taken in for questioning in the previous hour. The tactical agents were gone. What remained was Donovan and 3 agents and 34 motorcycles and the men who rode them, and the low amber light of a Montana afternoon that had finally spent its worst and was now simply present without demanding anything. The Iron Wolves were not in a hurry. Some were sitting on their bikes. Some were standing in the natural social arrangement of men who spend a great deal of time together and have learned the specific comfort of proximity without requirement. Someone had gotten cold sodas from inside and was passing them around. The elderly farmer in the seed company cap was still at the counter on what Emma estimated was his 4th cup of coffee, watching everything with the unhurried attention of a man who had decided this particular Tuesday was worth staying for. Rex was leaning against his motorcycle with his arms folded, the stuffed bear tucked into the chest pocket of his cut beside the placemat, drawing both slightly too large for the pocket so that the bear's remaining eye looked out over the edge at the parking lot. He looked like exactly what he was, a man in his 50s who had spent an afternoon in a parking lot doing what needed to be done and was now in the process of letting the doing settle into the past where it belonged. Emma walked to him. She held out her phone with a message already typed. "The agent says there are housing options. We will be all right. I wanted you to know before you leave." Rex read the screen. He typed back, "Good." She typed, "I want to ask you something." He handed the phone back. She typed, "Why did you stay? You could have called the FBI from the highway and kept going." He took the phone. He looked at the message for a moment longer than he usually thought about answers. He typed, "The letter was true. I know what true looks like." She read this. She looked up at him. She typed, "How?" He took the phone. He thought about how to answer this with the accuracy it deserved. He typed, I have known people who needed someone to stay and nobody did. I know what that costs. Emma read the words. She read them again. The amber light came down across the lot and made the chrome catch gold and made the brown hills east of Billings look like something a painter had arranged. She looked at the words on the screen, and she looked up at the man who had written them, this scarred, 52-year-old, in a wolf cut, who had learned one word of sign language many years ago for a reason he carried privately, and who had used that word today in a parking lot in Billings because a woman had needed to hear it, and it was the word he had. She typed, thank you for staying. He read it. He nodded. She put the phone in her apron pocket, and she raised both hands and signed to the 34 men in the lot, knowing none of them could read it, signing it anyway because it was her language, and it was what she had, and it was true. What she signed was, thank you, all of you. Hank Mercer was watching her hands. He said quietly to the men near him, I believe she said thank you. He turned toward Emma, and he said clearly enough for her to read, you are welcome, ma'am. Emma read his lips, and she smiled. It was not the functional expression she had learned to produce for the diner in the years of managing. It was the rare unguarded smile that only came out in certain conditions, the conditions being safety and genuine feeling, and the absence of the need to be anything other than what she was. Several of the Iron Wolves looked away with the deliberate inattention of men who have witnessed something private and are choosing to respect it. Agent Donovan came out of the diner and walked to Rex and put out his hand. Rex shook it. Donovan said, I am not going to ask what you knew about all of this before you made the call. Rex said, we were having lunch. Donovan said, you were having lunch for 4 hours. Rex said, the pie is good. Donovan looked at him. Something shifted in his face that in another context might have been a laugh. He said, I am going to need a contact number. The case has a long tail and there may be things we need to verify. Rex said, Hank has your card. He will call you. Donovan nodded. He looked at the lot, at the late afternoon light on the chrome and the bare ears sticking out of Rex Carver's pocket, and the woman near the diner entrance watching everything. He said, in 8 months of working this county, I spoke to 31 potential witnesses. Every single one told me they could not help, that they had not seen anything. Rex said people are afraid of what he could do to them. Donovan said yes, and she was not. Rex said she was afraid. She just did it anyway. Donovan looked at Emma. He said yes, that is exactly right. He went back to his vehicle, and the last federal presence pulled out onto Route 3 and headed toward Billings, and the day's business was done. The lot was quiet. Cora came out of the diner carrying a third placemat drawing and walked to where Hank Mercer was standing near his bike. She stopped in front of him and held out the drawing. Hank looked at it. Motorcycles again, many of them, and in one corner a careful rendering of what appeared to be a bear with one eye floating slightly above the rest of the scene. He said, is that the bear? Cora watched his lips and nodded. He said, you have been busy in there. She watched his lips, and then she signed something and looked at him with the patient expectation of a child who has asked a question and is waiting for the answer. Hank looked at the moving hands. He looked at her face. He said, I do not know what that means, but I think it means something good. Cora thought about this with the seriousness she brought to incomplete information. Then she pointed at him and gave him the drawing. Hank Mercer took the drawing from the 5-year-old's hands and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. He folded it carefully along its center and put it in the inside pocket of his cut, the same pocket where he had kept a 14-year-old FBI business card that had turned out to matter. Rex walked to Emma. He typed on his phone, we are going to ride out. Is there anything else you need before we go? Emma read the screen. She took the phone and typed, no, I have what I need. He took the phone back. He started to put it away and then stopped and typed one more thing and handed it back to her. He had typed, Hank's number is in here. If anything comes up, use it. She looked at the number at the bottom of the screen. She took out her own phone and copied it into her contacts and gave his phone back. He said clearly enough for her to read, take care of yourself and the girl. She raised her hands and signed slowly enough for him to see it as something deliberate. We will. And then she added the sign she had used the first time, the sign for OK, mirroring the one he had given her in the parking lot 3 hours ago when he had taken an envelope from a child's hands and read what was inside it and decided. Rex Carver did not know sign language. He had known one word once and he had used it and it had been received, and now she was giving it back to him across the afternoon air of a parking lot in Billings, Montana. And he looked at her hands making the shape of it, and he understood that this was what it felt like when something true completed its circuit. He nodded. He walked to his motorcycle. 34 iron wolves mounted up. The sound that rose from the lot was the sound that had preceded them into this afternoon. The rolling, dense percussion of 34 engines coming to life together, a sound that moved through the ground and up through the soles of your feet and settled in your chest at the frequency of something much older than motorcycles. Cora felt it through her feet. She stood in the parking lot with the sound moving through her small body, and she looked at the assembled bikes with the expression that children produce when they encounter something so much larger than themselves that all the usual processing falls away and they are simply present in it. Emma felt it too. She had always felt engines this way as a physical fact, a presence in the body rather than a sound in the air, and she stood with her daughter and let the vibration of 34 motorcycles move through her. And she thought about the morning, the pink sundress, the braid, the word brave spelled against her daughter's palm in the kitchen before everything changed. Rex Carver pulled out of the lot first. He came past Emma and Cora on his way to the highway exit, and as he passed, he turned his head and he looked at Emma with the gray eyes that had been looking at difficult things for 52 years without looking away, and the thing she read in them was not pity or the residue of a good deed registered for its own sake. It was the look of a man who had done what he said he would do and was at peace with that. She held his gaze for the 2 seconds it lasted. Then he turned back to the highway and he pulled out, and behind him, one by one, and then in flowing pairs, 33 more motorcycles followed, and the thunder of them filled the lot, and the highway, and the brown hills east of Billings, and the Montreal amber sky, and then it moved away down Route 3, diminishing by degrees until it was a vibration in the ground, and then even that was gone. The Dusty Fork parking lot was quiet. The broken sign threw its narrow shadow across the cracked asphalt. The tin awning trembled in a breath of evening air coming off the highway. Inside, Gerald was washing cups with the mechanical persistence of a man processing events through physical routine. The elderly farmer in the seed company cap came out of the diner. He stopped beside Emma and Cora on his way to his truck. He looked at the empty highway where the motorcycles had been. He took off his hat and held it at his side for a moment in the gesture of a man marking something he has witnessed and intends to remember. He said clearly and directly, "Good for you, young lady. It took guts." Emma read his lips. She nodded. He put his hat back on and got in his truck and drove away. Emma stood in the parking lot with her daughter, and she looked at the highway, and she breathed the air of a Tuesday in July in Montana that smelled of asphalt and engine oil and the dry sweetness of sagebrush when the temperature starts to drop. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the bone-deep tiredness of someone who has spent everything they had just to get here. She felt the unfamiliar quality of the air around her now that the thing she had been bracing against for 3 years was not there to brace against. She felt like herself. It had been a long time since she had felt like herself without also feeling like a woman waiting for something to go wrong. Cora tugged her hand. Emma looked down. Cora signed, "Can we get pie?" Emma looked at the diner. She looked at her daughter. She thought about the morning and the pink sundress and the word brave and the long, careful plan built out of 10 weeks of watching and one certified letter, and the chance that somewhere in the world there were men who had a code that still applied. She signed, "Yes, we can get pie." They went inside. Gerald put 2 slices on the counter without being asked. He pushed them across to Emma and Cora, and he did not charge for them, which was the most he was capable of doing about the afternoon, and which was in its modest way entirely sufficient. The pie was good. Cora ate hers with the focused contentment of a child who has learned that ordinary things, a warm room, a good meal, a mother nearby, are not ordinary at all. Emma sat beside her daughter at the counter of the Dusty Fork diner and watched Cora eat and let the afternoon settle around her like the last of the summer light coming through the smeared plate glass window, amber and slow and full of a particular kind of peace that is only available to people who have been through the specific thing she had just been through. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in January, Emma Briggs opened the front door of the small rented house in Billings that she and Cora had moved into in September. On the porch was a large cardboard box with her name on it and no return address. Inside the box was a new winter coat in Cora's size red with a hood lined in fleece, and beneath the coat a card. The card had no signature. It had four words written in a handwriting that was large and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who does not write often and is taking care. The card said, Wolves Watch. Stay warm. Emma stood in her doorway in January with the card in her hand and the winter air coming in off the Montana plains, and she looked at the empty street with the green eyes that had always missed nothing, and she looked for a long moment with the full attention she brought to everything. She did not see anyone. She did not expect to. The message was not asking to be seen. It was simply a fact delivered in the plain, direct way she had always preferred. She looked down at Cora, who was already holding the red coat against herself, with the expression of a child trying on something she has already decided she loves. Emma signed, Do you like it? Cora signed back, pressing the coat against her chest. It is the best coat I have ever seen. Emma looked at the street one more time. She signed to Cora, Let us go inside, it is cold. They went inside. Emma closed the door on the January morning and stood in the hallway of her small safe house and let the silence settle around her. The silence that was hers, that had always been hers, that she had carried through the years, and the damage, and the careful, long waiting as the one thing that could not be taken from her. No matter what else was, it was a good silence. She put the card on the shelf beside the door next to the small frame drawing that Cora had done on a placemat, the one with the motorcycles and the wolf in the center, and the two figures standing together beneath a hand-drawn sun. The drawing that Emma had found tucked under Cora's pillow 3 weeks after they moved in and had framed without comment because some things were made to be kept. The shelf also held a small brown stuffed bear with one button eye, which Cora had decided upon reflection she needed back after all, and which had arrived in a separate package 2 months after the coat wrapped in brown paper with a note in the same large, deliberate handwriting that said Own, keeping it safe. Here it is. Cora had placed it on the shelf herself, precisely in the center, the way you place something you intend to stay. Emma stood in the hallway of her house on a January morning in Billings, Montana, and she looked at the shelf, at the drawing and the bear and the card with its four plain words, and she thought about the summer in the parking lot and the 34 men who had ridden away down a highway without being asked for anything in return, and she thought about a hand raised in a gesture learned once and remembered across a long distance offered to a woman in a parking lot who needed to understand that someone was going to stay. She raised her own hand. She signed to the empty hallway to no one, to the particular quality of the silence that was hers alone and had always been enough, thank you. Then she went to make coffee for the morning, and Cora came downstairs in the red coat with the hood up, wearing it inside the house because she could, and Emma laughed a laugh that was visible in her whole body, in the way she threw her head back, in the way her eyes closed, in the way her shoulders shook. Laugh that made no sound in the world outside her, but was entirely, completely unmistakably real.